Paul Cale, thank you so very much, mate, for taking the time out of your day.
You're welcome, James.
Mate, it's very it's interesting. You're a very interesting person. You've been training in all sorts of martial arts. You've dived into combat sports, and you hold 8 black belts in different systems, which is truly remarkable, mate. How did you get into martial arts?
Um, yeah, well, basically, it was watching Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee movie, which back in the 70s. And yeah, I just thought it was amazing watching this little Asian guy kicking everyone around the place. Even, the movie magic wasn't truly understood back then, but just the skill sets that he was showing. And so I wanted to take up martial arts. And back then in the late 70s, early 80s, you only really could do what was in your town or what was in the town nearby. So you didn't have anywhere near the amount of martial arts available to you that you do today. But in saying that, things are, martial arts are disappearing today. We had a lot more choice, I think, in the probably late 80s, 90s. Now everyone sort of seems to be heading in, I think social media drives people into a populist belief in certain martial arts, and it's sort of a bit of a shame. But that's how I got into martial arts to begin with, was basically Bruce Lee movie.
Yeah, right. And what was the first style that you started, Paul?
Taekwondo. And
Taekwondo.
yeah, and it was, yeah, Taekwondo. And I went to a dojo. I was in a school hall, and there, every night that we trained twice a week, there would be over 100 people in there easily training. It was
Yes.
massive. Martial arts then was just huge, and
Yeah.
everyone was looking for a martial art to do. And yeah, and it was, and Taekwondo back then, which, if you watch Joe Rogan talk about it and things like that, you realize that it was a lot different to the sport Taekwondo you see today. So
Yeah.
but yeah, it was my start point.
Yes. I had Dean Lawler on the podcast a few weeks ago, Paul, and he's regarded obviously as one of the best self-defense experts in Australia. And it was interesting listening to Dean talk about, growing up in the 80s, and it was just an interesting time. How did, like, it just completely just boomed in the 80s? What was it like?
Well, it was really and it was interesting because the way you learnt about things is you brought books and then you would read about it. And obviously, every book, if it's written about a particular martial art, it will have an influence. It would be supporting that martial art. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
you're
that,
right.
but it was good because, I mean, for me, um, I did a lot of, um, you do a martial art, and I had a chance to just experience martial arts and make up my own mind between them. So, you read a book and you think, oh, well, that's an interesting take on it. You try to get a sense of I guess, the gist of the martial art, or the drivers behind its existence. And then you go off and train in it. And the only people really teaching, you know, there was a lot of lower belts, and if you did come across a higher belt, they were one of the only ones, around. And yeah, it was a really interesting time, and it was great to just actually experience things and make up your mind for yourself rather than running with popular points of view and so on.
Yeah. And what are some of the styles that you've practiced? Because you've got 8 black belts. So
hmm
what are the styles?
what I took up in the 80s was, I started off with Taekwondo. I think I got my black belt in Taekwondo around about 1983 or 82. And then I got into Judo in 1985 and Aikido with the Aikikai. And then I did join the army, got into karate. I did a little bit of karate before I joined the army, but I got into it heavily when I joined the army. and also Yoshinkan Aikido. So during the 80s, there wasn't the modern martial arts studios that you see today. They were more clubs. So they had 2 nights a week. So the reason I cross-trained, it wasn't a deliberate thing of, hey, cross-training is a great idea. I just wanted to do martial arts. And I just decided that I wanted to train as much as I could. So I would have to go to a couple of martial arts to be able to train every night of the week, or pretty much every night of the week. And I just always would choose a martial art that was very different to the one I was learning. So if I was doing taekwondo, I'd pick judo. If I was doing karate, I'd pick aikido. So that sort of grappling and striking were sort of balanced, and that I wouldn't be competing against different ways of thinking, and they were similar. So I wouldn't do something like taekwondo and karate at the same time, because you just sort of, it sort of made it a little bit sort of harder to learn. So that's sort of how that came about. And then when I joined the army, I got posted to Townsville. They didn't have Aikikai, and I heard about the Yoshinkan, which was sort of a hard style of Aikido. So I took up that. And then I was interested in sport Aikido, because I was doing sport judo and I was doing boxing and things like that. So I went and learned that and did that. And when I learn something, I think if I can get myself a black belt, that gives me, I guess, a foundation of understanding the martial arts. So a lot of times I just learn until I got my Shodan, make a decision, am I going to stay and go deeper into it or do something else? So that's how I ended up with the multiple black belts. Was just, I didn't want to just get, do a year or 2 years and think, oh, I know this art. I want to sort of have a foundation, make a decision if I'm going to keep going or not.
Yeah, you're a remarkable person, Paul. It's incredible, very impressive. And Richard Norton, who I had the pleasure of sitting down and chatting with on my podcast, he said to me a long time ago, anything good that has happened in his life has been a result of practicing martial arts. And me personally, everything I owe to martial arts. But how has martial arts impacted your life, Paul?
Yeah, I think I ended up being very attracted to Japanese martial arts. I very much like the Japanese culture around martial arts, which is basically Japanese martial arts are influenced by Japanese culture. So when you see that culture being, in something else besides martial arts, you realize that a lot of it, it's not really got to do with the martial art. It's got to do with Japan. And it's just their culture just is overlaid onto that martial art. And I very much enjoy what's called reiho, etiquette and discipline. Sort of like my number one thing for self-defense is learn not to be a prick, and have a little bit of respect for others, and learn to have manners. And I think there's a lot that comes from that discipline, and the display of discipline that then creeps into your life and becomes self-discipline. And then that set me up for the army later on, which was also just for me an advanced study of martial arts, was to join the army and do what I could there.
Yeah, amazing, Paul, amazing. And whereabouts did you grow up, Paul?
Cranbourne in Victoria, southeast suburbs of Melbourne. Back then, it
Yeah,
wasn't part of Melbourne; it was the country. But today, it's almost turned into outer suburbs, but basically out there.
yeah. And what was it like growing up? How was it for you?
The 80s were well, it was pretty violent. I know people think that today's violent. But without CTV and cameras everywhere and phones and everything else, it was people got away with a lot more than what they do today. And so it could be a pretty hectic place out that way. And like, Dandenong and Frankston and that back then, I'm not sure how it is today, but back then it was a pretty tough sort of area. And
Yeah,
martial arts was, well, to be honest, I did martial arts to learn how to protect myself and deal with the fighting and carry on. But what it actually did is just took me off the streets. So it just took
yes,
up my time, and I ended up doing martial arts instead of doing dumb things and getting in trouble.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think of this term, Paul? Violence is never the answer, but sometimes it's the only answer.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
But history's shaped through violence, and
yes,
it's a part of our makeup of what we are, and it's not unusual. If you look at primates, we're not unusual. We're just because of our technical ability and prowess, we the effects of our violence is um, devastating. But compared to so primates, yeah, no worries. But compared to, I guess, mammals, we're very violent. But
yeah,
yeah, it's part of the human condition, sadly. And I would love to say that that it's not the case, but you only have to look at the world and the way it sort of revolve. Well, the way it just we end up sort of in the similar situations that we were in the past, and sort of just keeps coming around again and again.
yeah,
So I think
yeah,
I think understanding violence and understanding how to deal with it is an important part in avoiding it in the first place. Knowing
yeah.
what it is and understanding it is a way of avoiding it, but also dealing with it if it does rock up on your doorstep.
Yes, yeah, couldn't agree more, Paul. It's interesting. Society at the moment pushes a narrative about toxic masculinity, and I think this is some of the worst advice I've heard. And I feel fearful and apprehensive about this next generation. And to me, I think masculinity is, I think, more important than ever because someone that's trained in violence has the capacity, obviously, to inflict violence, but then also understands the gentle side of it. It's that old Japanese saying, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. What do you think of this current mainstream media that's pushing this narrative? And I think it can be very detrimental.
Yeah, it's just a political narrative that is not going to last. Just like, it doesn't, again, it's just a populist narrative might have started with good intentions, but there's a lot of very poor information and it's not well thought out. And, and again, there's no such thing as toxic masculinity.
Yeah,
There's masculinity and toxic people. So, they're separate things. That's like saying toxic feminists. There's feminists and there's toxic women. Just the fact that you're a feminist doesn't make you toxic, nor masculine make you toxic.
exactly. Yeah, 100%. And I teach martial arts as well, and I teach children martial arts. And I think martial arts for kids has been, a massive learning curve for me. But I think just the discipline, as you were talking about, and what that instills in children. How can children benefit not just being respectful, but also embodying what martial arts brings?
Um, I think it like a lot of sports that children take up. I think it if it's done right, it can be very, very helpful for them. I think the issue that kids have with martial arts is that it's a smorgasbord out there to choose from, and I think there's a lot of you know I don't think there's many places that do a very good job with kids. Um, but if and what I mean by that is when you see that you have expectations of children, they rise to the occasion. They really do get into it, and you develop some really good young people with great skill sets. I just see a lot of things with martial arts just being used almost namesake to have children involved and not get much out of it, and that's sort of, I guess, disappointing. And you could say the same for adults too. There's a lot of martial arts being delivered by people that don't really have the qualifications to do what they're doing, and things are misinterpreted, misunderstood, and and so on. So I think it's great for kids if they're in a good school. It'd be like gymnastics. I
Yeah,
think gymnastics is fantastic for kids, sets them up
yeah,
for
I agree.
success in almost anything you do in life. However, if you go to a poor gymnastics school, that's doing nothing for you. It's just in the name only, you know. So I think martial arts is a bit like that. I think it's great for kids if you can find a school that, you know, does a great job with kids.
Yes, yeah, no, 100%, Paul. It's interesting. The current wave of martial arts and what's happening right now is you're starting to see a shift in more so mixed martial arts and the rise of UFC, and more schools now are integrating grappling and BJJ. Where do you think martial arts is going to be in the next 10 to 15 years?
Um, just like it did 10 or 15 years ago, there'll be something popular. Things that are popular today won't be popular. And the martial arts, the problem with popularity is that to keep growing when it's already very popular, you start sacrificing things to grow because you're trying to attract different demographics. When Brazilian Jiu Jitsu started, for instance, Gracie Jiu Jitsu, in our country, you know, early 90s, when we watched UFC 1, and I got involved in Jiu Jitsu, my first Jiu Jitsu class would have been 94, I think it was, around about
Yeah,
1994, maybe a bit earlier than that. And that was with Jean-Jacques Machado in his first seminar in Australia. And by then I'd been doing judo for um, probably six years or so, 6 or 7 years. So back then, the only people that took on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu were fighters. And we did it
yeah,
because we wanted to fight in the cage or fight no holds barred, what it was called back then, or Vale Tudo. Now, you know, mixed martial arts is the term that people use. But we knew we had to learn this method on the ground because of what, you know, Hoist Gracie had done. But, you know, the media were destroying us. They were saying you're pit fighters, it should be banned, it's got to be illegal, all this sort of stuff. Now it's super popular. Now I see the same thing happening to jiu-jitsu as what's happening to what happened to karate. And,
yeah,
you know, from being strong, effective to being, you know, ridiculed. And to actually see jiu-jitsu being ridiculed, to me, is amazing considering where it came from. But just like Aikido and just like karate, when you start compromising what you're doing to expand, then it's going to be the result of that compromise. And eventually it
yeah,
will fall away and be replaced with something else that will become the popular thing. And already, I think
yes,
already when you look at jiu-jitsu, it doesn't look anything like it did originally with the Gracies. Not just people say, oh, well, the technique's improved and all this. Well, I actually think people are becoming less general in their skill sets. So we used to always
yeah,
strike and grapple standing and deal with punches and so on. And today, um, you know, even though jiu-jitsu tournaments start on their feet, people just sit on their bum straight away and off they go. And it's I just find it that it's probably just going to follow the same path as I've seen martial arts do, and something else will become popular, and it just sort of goes in that same wave, you know.
yeah. One of the most amazing things about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Paul, and I'm sure you would obviously remember your first introduction, is how technique and leverage, with someone that's smaller and weaker than you can overpower you. It was extremely humbling when I first started jiu-jitsu because I came from striking arts and then went into BJJ. What was your first introduction like?
Well, I got to uh, have a role with Jean-Jacques Machado, and I got to have a role with some jiu-jitsu color belts. Back then, if you're a blue belt, you were, you know, you were very
High
senior in
level.
jiu-jitsu. If you're a purple belt,
Yeah.
you're probably most likely a Brazilian foreigner or something like that. So yeah, it was amazing, and it was amazing also what you could like at blue belt. I just remember getting to blue belt, and you just people didn't have a clue what they were doing on the ground. Whereas today, probably because of watching UFC and things like that, people have a bit of an idea. They're not completely naive to it, even if they haven't done it. They've sort of investigated it a bit, and it's different like that. Also, back in the 90s, for some reason, the Gracie Challenge spread beyond the Gracies. Like if you were doing Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, people almost thought that you were part of the Gracie Challenge, and I had people turn up and wanted to fight, and which was funny because they just think you're a grappler and then not realize you come from a striking background as well or whatever. So I just hit them a few times and then bring them to the ground and smack into them a little bit. And it
Yeah.
was an interesting time, but I always felt like you're fighting for the honor of jiu-jitsu, and now it's the opposite. Now I've got people, if I say something negative about jiu-jitsu, they're like, oh, not clueless of your background. They weren't even born when you started training. Yet, everyone on the internet has an opinion.
Yeah, yeah. There's always this argument, and I spoke to Gavin Hain, who is a second degree black belt in BJJ, and you get these people online that put shit on jiu-jitsu saying it's useless against multiple attackers, never go to the ground, it's a death sentence. And I think these people are very ignorant because jiu-jitsu or any grappling art is the only art that teaches you how to get back to your feet. That being said, there's a time and a place for striking, but also if you're in a situation where a relative is getting a little bit out of hand, you don't necessarily want to use striking. You could use jiu-jitsu to control the person, hold them down. Great for kids too. I mean, really effective for a bullying situation because, we know it's not advisable for another child to hit another child at school. But what do you think of all these people that put shit on jiu-jitsu?
I think it's two sides of a coin. There's people that put shit on jiu-jitsu who clearly, I would say most probably haven't really got a good understanding of jiu-jitsu. There will be some that have issues with jiu-jitsu for whatever reason, and they do grappling. So I do get that there's people that are maybe make comment on jiu-jitsu more in a technical piece. They've got a better understanding than maybe judoka or wrestlers or something like that. And they've got probably some legitimate points, but that's more of a technical argument. But people who just blatantly hang shit on jiu-jitsu most likely haven't got a clue what they're talking about. But it's the same on the other side of the coin. There's people who just blindly follow jiu-jitsu no matter what.
Yes.
And some arguments, I think the original jiu-jitsu, where you really did jiu-jitsu for vale tudo, anything goes, that made a lot of sense to me. What I see today with jiu-jitsu, I see a lot of people just get stuck into the sport. And I'm not talking about
Yes.
self-defense techniques, but I am saying this. If you want to, you want to grapple, it's going to start on your feet. You need to know how to grapple on your feet. And you're probably going to get someone throwing some punches at you or something like that. You need to know how to deal with striking. But once you clinch, you want to have a grappling technique. So there's a lot of grappling arts, and I wouldn't just say that jiu-jitsu is the only answer, but jiu-jitsu definitely with submissions and so forth. Jiu-jitsu. When I say jiu-jitsu, I kind of think of judo. Judo is just another judo, jiu-jitsu. Judo comes from jiu-jitsu. It's just a different term for jiu-jitsu that was promoted heavily by the Kodokan. And, so when I say jiu-jitsu, judo as well. But when you look at karate, its original form before it went to mainland Japan, it's got grappling in it. And I just think jiu-jitsu's got striking in it. So,
Yeah.
it's been well rounded, and I think the fact that you do a particular martial art means that you emphasize a particular thing. If you do jiu-jitsu, you emphasize grappling, but it doesn't mean that you're naive to striking. And I think sadly there is a lot of jiu-jitsu people that haven't got a clue how to strike
Yeah.
and so forth, and that's a bit disappointing. I think that just opens it up to be watered down and
Yeah.
damages its reputation. So it's
Yeah.
you know what I mean. Like I would have to see the argument, but generally speaking, a lot of people that make comment on the internet don't have any real deep understanding of what they're talking about. They just make comment,
Yeah.
and if something goes against the algorithm of the social media, off it goes. Like yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I think social media and the internet is playing a big part in shaping the way people look at martial arts in the 21st century.
100%, Paul. No, I totally agree with you. It's interesting. I play around with hoodie jumpers and jackets, and I try and learn different modifications that you can apply from gi to street. And it really makes a huge difference when we're talking about striking. When someone's inside your guard and throwing punches, you really, really have to modify from sport to street, because there is a massive difference in how people grapple. What's interesting, Paul, is you've been involved in the Australian Army for over 30 years, and you made headlines a while back. I think it was in 2013 when you stormed an enemy compound, and I think there was a situation where you actually had to use your training. In that situation, Paul, what was going through your mind?
That was in 2007. It was reported. Depends what outlet reports things, and I think
Yeah,
the Vice documentary sort of got it mixed around a little bit. But no, it was earlier in my career where that happened.
right. Yeah,
But I mean, my goal was to kill the individual with a firearm, but because it basically they were grappling. It was actually Cameron Baird that were grappling with, but I couldn't get a clear shot through shot. So I thought and I didn't have my knife with me at that stage, so I was left with sort of hands on and strangling the individual as
yeah,
opposed to shooting them. But it's definitely not your first option, hands on. You don't want to do that. Just the same as martial arts, the Japanese martial arts, they obviously want to use a bow and arrow. They want to use a spear. They want to get you at a distance. And it's only when you come close quarters would you fall into things like jiu-jitsu. You don't seek to grapple with someone who's trying to kill you. You want to finish them at distance as much as you can. But there was a couple of things that it made me become very aware at the effect of the stress on the body when you're fighting for your life. And the other thing that I became very aware of was what it's like to fight someone who's willing to die to kill you. And sometimes, we do things to survive, but with the individual who wants to kill you is willing to lose their life in taking yours, sometimes you've got to push the process and not be it's a very it's a different way of a different threat that you're dealing with, and it was a bit of an eye opener for me, definitely.
yeah. And all this training and skill that you've acquired over the years, this led way to you working with the Australian Army and the martial arts program, which you're the founder of Kinetic Fighting. Tell us a bit about Kinetic Fighting. How did this eventuate?
Um, well, basically, it started with the close quarter fighting, redeveloping that for two commando, or at the time it was 4 Commando, which in 2009 became the 2nd Commando Regiment, and just been asked to redesign that program. And then as time went on, I was sort of the SME for the Army, especially after having, the hands-on experience and so forth. And as time went on, so 2007 was the initial exposure, but, I was in Afghanistan in 07, 08, 09, and 2010. And it just, I guess it bedded things down. And the biggest thing was, I guess, after leaving, I was moving to the United States was the plan. But I ended up being asked to go to the Australian Institute of Sport to help build the culture around the concept of a Olympic combative sport branch at the AIS. So I stayed, and then I was planning to go to the US, and then I got asked by a former commander that I had at Commando, who was then very senior in the Army, asked me to develop the Army Combatives Program, something that everyone in the Army would do. So I stayed and did that, and then I got asked to help prepare people for Afghanistan. So I did that right up to the pandemic. So it's kind of like, it's just really been by accident. It's not something that I set out to do. And
Yes.
I just needed a company and a name and stuff around doing that, where, that I could invoice defense and have people help me in working with defense. And that's how the company came about. So it's all been just by request and me just saying, yep, I can do that, and getting
Yeah.
on with it.
And the curriculum, Paul, is fantastic. It incorporates a lot of real world situations that I think are extremely beneficial to self-defense. There's techniques from grappling arts, there's techniques from Muay Thai, there's techniques from Krav Maga. With your expertise and years of training, how did you come up with the curriculum? And I'm sure it's always evolving and it's always changing as well.
The biggest thing was knowing that we had 1 week. That's different with ACP. There's sort of like the levels have a different amount of days associated with the training. But it really came down to having, no more than a week to work with people that may not have any martial art skill whatsoever. So it was about what's really some fundamental gross motor skills that can, high percentage techniques that can deal with a high number of threats. And that's really where it came from, and just trying to keep it as simple as possible. And surprisingly, that takes a lot of skill. So, you've got to work through all this information and knowledge and then try and break that down to about 4 or 5 techniques. And in the past, we had martial arts type combat training, and it would have a large amount of techniques that really, a lot of the techniques that were picked, are techniques that normally take a very long time to be effective and good at. And you just don't have that time. So getting stuck into a bunch of judo throws, which in itself requires a lot of skill and effort,
Yeah.
and then to switch to, another martial art skill set, it was a bit clunky, and it also just takes too long to be good at. And people were walking away not remembering the information, and it was almost just a tick in a box type thing. So this was about making sure there was a benefit to it, that people could defend themselves, and that people could be effective in a team format, because soldiers don't fight on their own, and how to work with another operator and another soldier, and how to work in a section environment and things like that.
Yeah.
So and how does it link with shooting? How does it link with close quarter battle, which is where you find yourself dealing with the enemy, because, the enemy has a say in your plan, and they're always keen to scuttle your plan. And people just don't like getting shot, funnily enough. So they attempt to, if they can and they're close enough, or if you have a stoppage or a problem or anything going on, they'll attempt to smother and get onto the weapon, and then that's where you need the skill set. Similar to jiu-jitsu for the Japanese samurai back in the day, in getting their weapon system back going, getting back with their sword or their knife or what have you. You want to be minimum amount of time hand to hand when it's a gunfight. You want
Yes.
your hand to hand skills to get you back on your gun. So I guess it's that side of it is different to your normal martial art thinking, but it's imperative for the gunfighter. It's sort of the mortar that keeps the bricks together for close quarter battle.
Yeah, it's an amazing system, Paul, and congratulations on, everything that you've done with that program. And now it's moved around the world. So where else is kinetic fighting being used in the space?
It's been taken up by the New Zealand Army for their infantry, and in the last couple of years, we've been teaching the Thailand Army as well, and having basically a blend with the ties of military, Muay Thai, and kinetic. It's been taught to the Indian Army, Gurkhas, and Americans. I did a lot of work with United States Special Forces and SEALs and so forth.
Wow, wow. Is kinetic fighting similar to the McMap program, the martial arts program they use in America, but the
Um,
techniques that you teach?
it's different. That program is. I have trained in that program with the U.S. Marines with instructors from the MACE, which is their Martial Arts Center of Excellence, and sort of given an honorary black belt in it. So I don't count that as one of my black belts. When I've had a few honorary black belts given to me, I don't tend to count that. I just appreciate it for what it is. A bit like an honorary degree or something, I don't say, well,
Yeah,
this is my thing. But it's a good program, but it's able to adjust, and that's handy. So they have a review each year, get together and re-look at things. And when I was training with them too, I would show them different things and different ways of looking at stuff, and they were always willing to take on information just to assess it, just to look at
yeah,
it and see what they need. And I think it was a good idea. They've turned it into almost a martial art in its own right. But
yeah,
I think it's a good idea. It's different to the modern Army Combatives Program, and that's heavily influenced by jiu-jitsu. But I also think what's interesting is when I watch people wrestling and they jump in and they're actually in their kit, and the difference that having body armor on for choking, for instance,
yeah,
and wearing GP boots, which are designed to protect your ankle and lace all the way up your ankle, and watching people try to do ankle locks on someone who's wearing laced boots that are designed to protect the ankle and wonder why they're having no effect. These are the
yes,
reasons that combatives don't touch on these things, because they're low percentage. And
yeah,
at battlefield, everyone tends to have shoes on. But, sometimes they don't, but you're not kind of looking for the barefooted fighter to put your footlock on. But,
yeah,
yeah, the equipment plays a big part. And, and the other thing too is in the combative realm is the hands. The hands are what holds weapons. So you always want to be on the hands. You don't want to be hanging out trying something and someone starts stabbing you while you're doing it. Just the same as when you watch jiu-jitsu guys who have not really dealt with punches on the ground, and you start doing punches, which for me, that's just a normal part of ground fighting, is with punches, without punches, it's all part of the same thing. And
yeah,
when those punches, when that fist has a knife in it instead, the consequences are even greater. So yeah,
100%.
yeah,
Yeah,
it just changes things up, and I think, yeah, and I think the combative piece is just obviously we have to stay very cognizant of that situation and make sure that people are
Yeah.
aware of striking and weapons, and as well as other people in the battlefield,
Yes.
multiple threats and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, Paul. You touched on weapons, and I train with Geordie Lavis McBain, and he's a fantastic coach. And it was interesting. One day I was rolling with him, and he had a little plastic knife he hid in his gi, and it was interesting. It just changed the game up. And I've pressure tested with knives before, and it really is extremely difficult. And the amount of training that it requires to actually be able to, one, come up with a high probability success or technique, it's incredibly difficult. What are some of the techniques that you've pressure tested and incorporated into kinetic fighting and helped the Australian Army?
Well, the knife, we introduced the knife into the Australian Army. So now that's becoming a issued weapon, issued tool that soldiers will be issued. I'm not sure if it's just infantry or if it's all of Army, but things like that, because it's a game changer. And just like it's a problem for the person, like you're a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and it's a massive problem. Well, it's you become even a greater problem if you know how to grapple and you have a knife. So I look at it from that side too. It's not just, oh, well, what do I do against this because it's such a threat? I also, as soldiers, we want to be a threat. We want to, so for us, we want to grapple with a knife. So we want to know how to
Yes,
use a knife and how to, and you could be grappling a blue belt. They pull out a weapon and they instantly become a black belt. And
100%.
so when you're grappling with a black belt and they have a weapon, that's kind of the ultimate of what you want. You want all those skill sets, but with the weapons and with um, having support with other soldiers, and you become very hard to deal with.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrifying. It's a reality check, and yeah, it's something that I think is extremely important that a lot of martial arts schools need to implement is the reality of violence and self-defense, and educate their students on the importance of proper training and also pressure testing as well. You you also I've seen videos of you use various chokes on the what do you call it, the vest that's
Yeah, body
used,
armor. Yep,
the body
yep.
armor. Yeah, that's fascinating. How did you come up with some of those chokes?
Well, people like Geordie, other people who are part of the program and so forth, and so on. We just look into, well, what's similar chokes that we can do with a gi, and then what's chokes that you can't do with a gi that and also the responses, some of the responses in defending yourself. Funnily enough, I found a lot of effective ways of doing that are found in techniques that are hundreds of years old that really don't have a place when you're doing no gi or gi jiu-jitsu. But as soon as you've got a body armor on, they make total sense. So it
Yes.
was really interesting because it brought a bunch of techniques alive that didn't have a place in modern jiu-jitsu, that in combatives they absolutely have a role to play. So it has been a sort of bit of a fascinating journey. And I would say
Yeah.
that having sort of a deep understanding and exposure to a range of martial arts, it's really been something I could tap into to find solutions to problems that we have. And so
Yes.
it's come about just through trial and error, and that's pretty much it, really.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating because it just opens up a whole nother arsenal of weapons and attacks. It's incredible. You you've recently worked on the movie Land of the Bad. So you were a military advisor and tactical trainer, and you were working with some of the biggest names in Hollywood, like the Hemsworth brothers. What was that like? What was that experience like?
It was good. I mean, I'm not a I'm I'm not really caught up in the whole modern movie thing. So um, I just see it as, my job's to train these guys just like soldiers. But the interesting thing is that what I felt with the brothers, especially like Luke, Liam had exposure from some other movies that he had done. And we just did a few things. And he also, it depended what role you played. But the main thing for me is that I had to work with the guys that were playing Delta operators and give them a sense of weapon handling and tactics and stuff that would fit that role. And they were just, Milo and Luke and Ricky and Liam, just incredibly motivated to learn and really thankful, really thankful of your time and effort with them, and giving out yell outs, shout outs all the time, and so on. And you really realize how much they appreciated it, and then they would want you on set. And just so I would do a lot of build up, do a bunch of stuff, read the script, have a look at some of the ways that people were going to be killed or things happened, and to come up with things. But I had a chance to implement extreme close shooting techniques, and there was a bunch of stuff. I mean, in the end, there's a nice little knife cutting of an enemy combatant and things like that. And some of them, the director would go, I love that, let's use that. There was some that I thought were great, but the director didn't use. So, in the end, it comes down to the director, and the movie really does live and die by the director and the editor, really. It's amazing when you watch it, the magic of Hollywood. The amazing thing is this after production effect and how well they can make things look is incredible. And it's the end product. It's not what you remember. Like I couldn't even tell you how the movie plays out, because we would film something and we would do 3 or 4 variations and versions. I don't know what the editors are putting together. So it's,
Yeah.
I couldn't even imagine, well, which way did they go with that scene or this scene, because there's a couple of options. And I can understand why actors really don't know a lot about that movie until they watch it and realize, well, this is how it's been put together. And it was it was an interesting experience.
Did you end up watching the end product? Did you watch the movie?
No, I got invited to a showing just for the production staff in Brisbane, and I was in Thailand teaching the Thai Army at the time. So I missed it, but it was good. Some friends who went, basically, the Luke and that called out for me to come up and stuff, and I wasn't there. So I was a bit disappointed that I didn't want to feel like I was disrespecting the movie not being there. But I moved from one job to the next, and I was in Thailand at the time, so I missed it. But I'm looking forward to seeing it. And some people have seen it. Like, look, it's a movie. People. It doesn't matter what movie it is. They're never real. They're going to be close, and there's some movies that do a great job getting very, very close. But still, in the end, it's a movie. And, the idea of the movie is to be entertainment. So there's things that, I could say, but the director has an objective, and that's it. That's how it goes. And in the end, the goal is for the movie to be entertaining. It's not an educational documentary on soldiering. It's an entertainment movie. So that's the other thing too. I need to, probably stop. I have a lot more expectation of a movie called Long Tan or something because of its historical significance. So if you have a movie and it's meant to be a depiction of a particular time, then I have a higher expectation of it. But this was sort of make believe, really. The whole scenario was make believe, and there was things that the other part of it is simply just the ability to get your hands on certain things. And in Australia, we don't have the access to the military support that they do in the United States. So they actually have an entire movie production group that's all about supporting movies with soldiers and so on. So they put the US military in a good light. in Australia, one, they were all meant to be Americans, so they wanted to borrow Australian equipment, but there's nothing in it for the Australian Air Force to pretend to be American Air Force. So
Yeah.
it's a different thing. So it's just what can we get our hands on, So it was like, can we parachute out of a helicopter? Well, you can, but it's sort of a training thing, not really an operational thing. But hey, it's a movie, If you can't get your hands on a plane, then I guess jump out of a helicopter, and just
Yeah.
make it entertaining.
Would this be something that maybe down the track you'd like to do a bit more of? Get more involved in working on movies, especially to do with with your training and things like that.
It's not something that I'm chasing. It was an opportunity. A friend who
Yeah.
is an armorer basically sort of put my name forward. I mean, a funny thing was I turned up and I thought I had the job, but I actually was meant to be auditioning for the job. So I'm auditioning. I'm actually questioning them. I'm like, am I going to work for you or not?
Yeah.
In the end, they're like, oh, no, we really want you. It will be good. Work for us. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll
Yeah.
do that. But I didn't
Yeah.
realize that. But it was a good experience because I hadn't done it before. So I really enjoy experiencing things for the first time, and I'm open to doing it again, no problem. But it's not something I'm like, hey, I want a career at, advising on movies. If
Yeah.
someone asks me to do it, I'll look at it and then do it. And if not, then no problems. I'll keep doing what I'm doing.
Yes. Yes. So who has been some of the most influential people or important people in your life that has really just been so supportive?
I would say my closest friends would be martial arts friends, even more so than army friends. I've got a couple of friends, army friends, I'm very close with, but I'd say the majority would be martial arts, and the majority would be Japanese martial arts, um, where we share a culture together and a way of thinking together. So Joe Tambu was a is a great friend and also someone who showed a lot of support during a time where it was not normal to cross train, and I was trying a lot of things that were a bit different, and yeah, great support. Another good friend's Darren Jordan. He's been doing Kyokushin karate since 1970. One of the first branch chiefs in Australia, and started doing Thai boxing back in late 70s. Before before the big rush on it now. And that's the big thing, like having those links with people who have these deep links in Thailand, Japan, Brazil, things like that. So and now people like Dan Higgins, he's another martial artist, jiu-jitsu, but all-round fighter who basically he was in Japan same time, same period as I was, 91, 92. He was at the Shotokan headquarters training. I was at the Yoshinkan headquarters training. And
Wow.
it was, yeah, it was interesting. And there's others, but those names are people who, you know, longevity wise, they're the people that are always there supporting and, always have time for you. And they happen to be martial artists, and it's very, well, it's humbling, but the other one too is, my karate instructor from the start, Bryson Keenan, and he organised my links with John Blooming, the late John Blooming, who was the most senior person in Kyokushin outside of Japan, and back in the late '60s already had a Kodokan 6 dan, and was with Geesink and all them who were the first foreigners to become world champions in judo and stuff, and just amazing people with amazing backgrounds, and a lot of my instructors and stuff have passed away now. So there's other people too, but they've passed away, and they had a great effect on me. And but yeah, sadly, yeah, they, people do pass on, and but yeah, I would say martial artists. As far as the army goes, there were some incredible people when I was young, Vietnam vets. Most of my military upbringing as a young person was with Vietnam veterans and so forth, and they gave me great understanding of what it is to be a person of substance, and to have standards and expectations of yourself and others, and so on, and that really did set me up well for everything else I did in life. So there's some between martial arts and some great military people. Also, many of them, sadly, have passed. But yeah, it's those people, warriors, basically, have been a big part
Yeah.
of my education, and big part of me being a good person. I think I think that whole warrior attitude is one where you're prepared to take on hardship when it's unexpected. Something very different to like we. I love it when our young guys are fighting and stuff like that. I think it's a good exposure to have a sporting field to replace the battlefield. Also, the consequences aren't as high, obviously, but you still have that nervous energy, and you still get to know what it feels like to go into a confrontation. But I, I just the whole gambit of all of that, all of that exposure, whether it be competitions, and I would compete in anything. I did full contact karate, I did jiu-jitsu, judo, Tamiki Aikido competitions, no holds barred, shuto, uh, pretty much anything, boxing, kickboxing, just chance to just jump in and be confronted with someone else, and that warrior mindset, as opposed to the fighting piece. I'm not discounting. I'm saying it's very important, but the fighting piece, you prepare for the fight. You know when it is. You get
Yes.
ready for it. You make weight, and you have the fight. I think the warrior piece, the difference between a fighter and a warrior, is that you prepare for the fight you don't see coming. And you might be nowhere near at your best, but that fight is in your face, and you've got to do something about it, and you've got to get through it. And we're not just talking about a physical fight, but it might be something that's happening with your business, your company. It might be something that's happening with your family. Whatever it is, there's something that needs to be dealt with. And I think that warrior attitude is just or accepting the challenge and seeing it through, regardless if you're ready for it or regardless if you want to be involved in it. There's things that happen to us
Yeah.
that we've just got to get through. And that warrior mindset is about getting through adversity.
Yeah. Well said, Paul. 100%. I think, with any sort of martial art, I think it does. It helps build resiliency and being able to overcome adversity and push through difficult times. And one thing that really impressed me about you, Paul, is you've still got it, mate. You still train regularly. I see some of your content online, your judo and jujitsu. What is some best advice that you can give people that are just sort of moving into their older age, but still wants to keep up martial arts training? Because obviously, we do get injuries, we get certain, muscle problems and things like that. What's some advice that you can give?
Well, for me, recently I'm having I've had a lot of damage to the body with what I've done. So I've just lived a fairly full on life. And I guess the consequences of that are playing out for me now. My shoulders are completely reconstructed. My biceps both have been reattached. My knees are shot. So I would say that for me, there's a lot of things that I can still do well, but many, many things I can't do. And many, many things I
Yeah.
can show and instruct and teach people to do, but can't really do it myself without injuring myself, literally hurting myself, hurting someone else, or throwing someone. I'll
Yeah,
hurt my,
right.
it'll hurt me as much as it hurts them. But so
it doesn't look like it, Paul. When I watch you, mate, like it, yeah, I don't
oh,
even
it
know.
hurts me just sitting
Yes,
here talking to you. I'm
yeah,
in pain. I'm always in pain. But it's just it's what I try to do is I try to adapt and modify what I do for get around my injuries. And I think that's where the depth of knowledge and information is very interesting. Like you're not going to get me doing any drop COs or any, not even hip throws. I'm not going to use anything like that because my knees just can't cope with that dynamic turning and so forth. But I love sacrifice throws and Satemi.
yeah,
And the thing is, I can do that. I can do things where I can wrestle, apply techniques. So that's another thing is when you look at the depth of techniques and information a martial art has. Judo, for example, many throws, like 50 odd throws in the Kodokan syllabus. Competitors only use a couple that are their favorite techniques, and they work off that and adapt from that. But I think as time goes on, if you stay with what you're doing, it won't be about being your favorite techniques. It will be about being appropriate techniques to your injuries and your age.
yeah.
So you can actually keep doing what you're doing and adapt it to around the restrictions that you may have with your body. And then you can stay with it. You can keep going. But yeah, for me, just I guess more recently, um, it's been a problem.
Yeah.
It's been an issue, and if you can't see that, that's fantastic. But it definitely
Oh
is an
yeah,
issue.
I wouldn't have known, Paul. I wouldn't have known. Like just watching you, mate. It's impressive, mate. Impressive.
Mm. Yeah, I appreciate that, but it definitely is hard going to do it. Sometimes
Yeah,
especially if it's a big group, like it's an important group, I'll just wear a few things, knowing that it's going to be bad afterwards, or the pain might last a few days. But for longevity, to answer your question, it's about adapting what you're
yeah,
doing and your martial art. Um, it does make a big difference if you have a good culture in your school, in your dojo. So if people respect people that have information and knowledge, and they draw upon that. I've got some great students here, like Benjamin Kelleher and people like that, who are incredibly good fighters, um, but incredibly respectful. They've got that cultural piece, and it benefits them because they get, you do what you can to make them as good as possible. But also, it's good for you because as the older exponent, you're able to pass that information on and see it live through someone whose body is functional, and to watch them actually
yeah.
deliver those techniques, it's a handy thing.
Is that one of the things you love about teaching, Paul? Just seeing the progression in your students?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Yeah,
I think, yeah, you want to have an effect on people that that people had on you, and you want it to be a positive effect. And I know that not everything I've done and everyone I've dealt with has maybe been positive, but in my mind, I think I'm doing the right thing, and that's all you can do is the best you can, and what you think is right at the time, and hold to that, and that's it. How it plays out is how it plays out. But most of the time, it's a positive effect. Sometimes
yeah,
maybe not, but as long as you learn from that, and then yeah, and away you go.
yes, yeah. And what's the next 5 years look like for you? Are we pushing kinetic fighting to various other countries? What's going to happen
No,
in the next 5 to 10
not really.
years?
I look with the Army combative stuff, which Kinetic is. I just let that play. Like it's way bigger than I ever expected it to be. I didn't expect to have two armies doing it full on, and a bunch of specialist units around the world using the system and stuff. So it's beyond my expectations already, and I have no interest in really, you know, maybe we'll do some stuff in the United States that some people have asked about. I've had a lot of interest in India and things like that. But for me, if you say, well, what's my interest? Um, it's absolutely kinetic is a big part of that, always will be. But at the moment, it's the fusion of Japanese and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I very, very much like um, bringing those two things together and
Yeah,
co-grading people so they receive a legitimate Japanese grade along with their legitimate Brazilian grade. And that is sort of what I enjoy doing because it taps into really most of my history in martial arts. And yeah,
yeah.
that's probably the next thing is yeah, beginning that process that of Japanese with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
I love that, Paul. Is that's what you're most looking forward to is more going down that teaching route and just teaching and educating students and yeah, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Really good stuff, mate.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's a big
And
core of
Paul,
who I am. So it's what you want to do.
yeah, yeah, no, I love that, Paul. And Paul, where can people find you?
We're out at 26 Wallace Street, Albion, is where the school is. So people are welcome to come in, where we run our combatives classes each night. Um, or they can just reach out and send us an email at Paul at KEF Group, KEF for Kinetic Fighting, KEF group.com, and they can reach out that way.
And you're on the socials as well, Paul?
Yep, yep. Paul Cale Official on Instagram and Facebook, and yeah, they can message there as well. I mean, I'm not a diligent social media person, so messages may be unanswered for some time because, I mean, it wasn't that long ago I didn't even realize I was getting messages in certain apps and so on, and people had asked questions or tried to contact me, and yeah, just felt like it's ignored. But that was just me not even realizing the messaging process, showing my age a little bit. But yeah, they can reach out in socials or send an email or what have you.
Yeah. Well, Paul, mate, you are a remarkable person, and it's been an absolute honour to sit down and have a chat with you, mate. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
No worries at all. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you, mate. And hopefully we'll catch up again. I'd love to do some more training with you.
Yep.
And every time I jump in and train with you, I'm always learning something different. And yeah, I'm literally my mouth's on the floor whenever I watch you demonstrate a technique. And I look forward to jumping on the mat with you again soon.
Always welcome. No worries at all.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Paul.
Thank you too for inviting me onto your podcast.
Thanks, mate.